So quickly, just introducing myself. My name is Lori. On chat, to help with any technical questions you have, such as sound, is our project manager, Farhad Sheklawala. So we do encourage you to use your chat box throughout this presentation. We try to make it as interactive as possible, so just ask your questions and we will bring it up throughout the webinar. Okay, so moving on. Reminder that by attending today, you can actually earn a CAE credit, which you can put towards your professional accreditation. Farhad's going to share a quick link in the chat box so you can learn more about that if that's something you're interested in doing. And yes, we will be recording this and sharing it with you in a follow-up email that we'll send out tomorrow. So you'll see the presentation, the slides, and everything. So just sit back and relax and enjoy the presentation. So as you recall, when you registered for this webinar, we asked you, what are you currently doing to attract volunteers or inspire them to greater roles? So how are you attracting and inspiring volunteers? And Barry's going to talk about this more, but I thought I'd share some of the answers that we saw. So some of you are saying that you talk about the personal benefits that they'll receive, growth, new experiences, that's great. And a lot of you talked about, again, that personal touch, the personal invites that you send. Some of you are offering benefits, membership incentives, or even a free membership or scholarships. A lot of you are doing the same kind of e-blasts, newsletters, flyers, word of mouth is big. So a lot of you are doing that. And then we actually got this quite a lot. You know, you're just relying on the old standbys, the same people who always volunteer, and pretty much doing nothing, which is why you're here today. So that's great. And to speak to these issues today is Barry Altland. He's the author of Engaging the Head, Heart, and Hands of a Volunteer, which is a simple guide for feeding the passion of volunteers or those who serve. And Barry's had 15 years developing talent and leadership and has led hundreds of workshops and interactive learning experiences on this topic. And we always love to share something a little personal about our presenters. And so Barry actually lives in the picturesque Winter Garden, Florida, which is just outside of Orlando. Sounds very nice, Barry. And he volunteers quite a lot himself. He's mostly volunteers with the Association for Talent Development, but also with a soccer group, Matthew's Hope, which is a homeless ministry, a Gift for Teaching, which donates school supplies to high schools in need. And he's also plays competitive softball 3 nights a week. So I don't know how he has the time to do it all, but Barry, we're going to unmute you. And now I'm just going to pass presenter control over to you and allow you to tell us all about volunteering. Welcome, Barry.
Lori, thank you so much. What an honor it is to spend some time with all of these wonderful learners on a Thursday afternoon. And I was blessed. I actually just came from an event in Seminole County, which is just north of Orlando here in Central Florida. And I was with a group called Republicans in Action. So we're not going to get into a political discussion, but they are a volunteer-supported organization, and I was the guest speaker for their luncheon today. And I asked the question that I love to ask groups when I have them together. I love to ask, okay, so who in this group is a leader? And when I asked that of the group today, it was almost as if on cue, many of them in the group, they all took their index finger and they pointed directly at the person who is the coordinator for their group. And then I asked the follow-up question, so what makes Nancy, in this case, the leader? And of course, it was her title that identified her as the leader. And I share that quick anecdote because that's happened more than one time in organizations where I've been invited in to speak, because I really challenge leaders, and I challenge all of you who are on our session today to think about leadership in a much different way. You're going to hear me speak to leadership quite a bit during the course of our next hour, and please know that I am speaking directly to you when I use the word leader. And think less about leadership driven by title, but think about leadership more as somebody who has an opportunity to influence the experience of others around them. And we're going to dig into what that means a bit more during our time together, but just know that when I'm speaking of a leader, I'm speaking to you, and really excited to be able to share this concept of what I call the volunteer continuum. When you're challenging people in your organization to either step in or possibly step up to a greater role of responsibility, we have to acknowledge that everybody who is serving in an organization, if they choose to get involved in some way as a volunteer, that they have a very natural life cycle that begins with the attraction phase and then heads into discovery, where you try to find mutually how we can work together, which then leads to engagement, and then you see the gold diamond of sustainment, and then finally, at times, you even experience what I call redirection. And it's just important for us as leaders to acknowledge that there's this natural continuum or life cycle that exists for every volunteer. And really what your goal is as a leader is to take that phase that exists between engagement and possible redirection, which is really the sustainment phase, and try to stretch that phase for as long as you possibly can. And you do that as a leader with intent. You do it on purpose. By the things that you say and the things that you do, there are really easy things that you can build into your repertoire that help elevate you as a leader and ultimately have an impact on volunteers in your organization that will encourage them to step in and to possibly step up into greater roles of responsibility. So I share all of that just to lay a foundation. We're going to use this continuum as a guide for our time together this afternoon. I say this afternoon based upon wherever you might be. And with that, we're going to begin with the attraction phase and really focus on what that means and how you might consider attraction as opposed to just thinking about volunteer recruitment in its traditional sense. So I have challenged in the book those who use the term recruitment in the volunteer space for your volunteer-supported organization, because I think of recruitment in a purely transactional way. In other words, in traditional recruitment, you think about it in, say, a paid professional organization or a corporate-type organization, you have an open role. And then you post that role, and then you accept potential candidates who could possibly fill that role. You go through a mutual selection process, and then eventually that person fills that role. And it's almost like you're attempting to a whole. And even though some of those components may align with the way that you attract individuals to your organization to be able to serve, there's a bit of a difference. And to me, I think of it is more of attraction in a love kind of way, because serving as a volunteer, it really is an affair of the heart. And there is an emotional component that exists, and it's not just purely transactional, but I really encourage leaders to think about what are the things that you can emphasize that may attract an individual to want to serve in your organization, that may even just inspire them to get involved at all, or certainly to get inspired to get involved more deeply and to step into a leadership role, and be able to emphasize those specific things that ultimately serve that individual and really help to meet their needs. So again, I encourage you to just think about that in a slightly different way. It's not just about volunteer recruitment. It's not just about filling a hole. And I've discovered that oftentimes when we get involved in conversations about our organization, especially when we get a whiff that somebody might want to get a little bit more involved, immediately we start talking about what our organization's needs are, and we start recruiting for the organization. And you're going to hear this theme throughout our time together. It's really about trying to find out what would attract that individual to serve in our organization. And in order to do that as a leader, I extol the value of something called Otherliness. And here is something that I'm challenging all of you to do. I would love for you to, what I call, blow up the chat box. Excuse me. When I participate as a virtual learner, as all of you are, what I do, I'm one of those people that's constantly typing away in the chat box. I'm leading that back channel conversation. And what I'd like to encourage all of you to do is do the exact same right here. So when you hear the word otherliness, what comes to mind? How would you define the word otherliness? And I'll give you a hint as you're doing that. First of all, any response that you're going to make, try to do so in what I call Twitter style. Make sure it's succinct and to the maybe 140 characters or less, and be able to really drive the conversation in a very straightforward and brief way. So how would you define otherliness? As I take a sip of water right there, I see that somebody is encouraging our participants to type away. Yes, and I do encourage you to do that. I'll give you a hint as you're doing this. If you're trying to look it up anywhere, chances you may be disappointed because it's not actually a word that you may find in a traditional dictionary. You're going to find it in the Urban Dictionary, certainly, but the otherliness word is not one that falls in Merriam-Webster.
So Barry, do you want me to read some of these out?
Yeah, I'm not able to see them, Lori, so please share what you're seeing there.
Okay, so from Sarah, we have outward focus. So focusing on others, not yourself, which sounds pretty good. Teresa says thinking outside the box, which I like that one. Ruth, it's 7 a.m. wherever she's calling in from, so she's still just drinking her coffee. Otherliness equals being genuine. Being genuine. That's from Julie, who's shared a few great comments already. Carol said putting needs of others front and center. Or how about Rose says focusing on the other person, not me. Seeking to understand the other, make a real connection, including the organizations I volunteer with. So putting oneself in another space, uniqueness. How does this sound, Barry? Does this resonate with what you're thinking about otherliness?
Yeah, Lori, it absolutely blows me away, and I love to hear this because as I openly acknowledge in the book that otherliness is not really a word yet. When I present it in front of people, they already know what the word means. They understand just by the way that the word flows that it carries a very unique meaning. And the way that I officially define it is that we really need to place the needs, the wants, and desires of others ahead of our own. And how important that is when you're wearing your leadership hat in your volunteer-supported organization. And the short way of thinking about that is it ain't about you. It's not supposed to be about you or even your organization or your cause or your beneficiary or your mission or anything else. Not more important than the individual volunteer who chooses to serve in your organization. So I present this as a concept that really is a driving force for leadership in your volunteer-supported organization. It's always doing what you can to place the needs and wants and desires of others ahead of your own and ahead of the organization as a whole. And the business reason for doing that, we often see this, that, yeah, you can still get it done by placing the organization's needs first, and chances of you have fallen into your role by placing the organization's needs first, and you often end up with short-term results. But when you place the individual needs first, chances are you're going to drive longer-term results and sustainable outcomes just from placing that person into a role that's going to have meaning to them, that's going to fill their passions, and ultimately they're going to be the one who chooses to serve for a much longer time. We're stretching that sustainment phase by placing their individual needs first. So again, that's a very practical application of this big concept called otherliness. And I want to take it down to the next level as well by acknowledging that when you're marketing your volunteer roles, when you're communicating them out, that here are some specific tips and techniques that you could try that may help you to be even more successful. And the first one I suggest is when you post your volunteer roles, make sure instead of just posting the roles that you currently have open, I see this, I'm on a number of mailing lists for different volunteer-supported organizations, that they just post, say, here are the roles that we currently have open, as opposed to putting all of your volunteer roles out there, even if somebody is sitting in the incumbent seat. And the reason why I suggest to do that is because whether you mean to or not, you're really messaging to your potential volunteers that only your open roles and filling those is what's important to you, not necessarily fulfilling their needs and wants and desires by their service. So just consider that, posting all of those roles, even the filled ones out there, as opposed to just posting available roles. And I also encourage you to really develop thorough role descriptions and include such details as, well, what's the length of time that somebody would reasonably expect to serve in this role on a weekly or a monthly basis? Where would that happen? Is it live? Is it near where they live? Is it far away? Is it virtual? Whatever it might be. Give them some insight on whether they're going to be working by themselves or working with other people. Let them know if this is a behind-the-scenes activity or if this is one where they'll have direct contact with a beneficiary or a client or with other people. Maybe there's an age requirement. Maybe there's an ideal age range that may work well for that role. And maybe there's some other skills or requirements that may help that person to self-select in or out of a specific role. And then I also encourage that when you're developing role descriptions, add this line. A person who enjoys blank may find this role appealing. Let me give an example. If you have a greeter role within your volunteer structure, maybe somebody who is outgoing and friendly and who really enjoys interacting with people or feels comfortable in doing that may find this role appealing. And then chances are a shy person or somebody who is not such an extrovert that they would say, hey, probably not the right role for me, and then they could opt out, recognizing that it's not an ideal alignment for their gifts. And then finally, it's being able to add an additional line that says, hey, if you don't see a role that's listed here that matches your unique gifts or your talents, well, let's talk about that. Tell us how you would like to make a difference in this organization. And I think that these can all be helpful tips in your marketing and your communication out as you're letting folks know that, yeah, we do have a need for volunteers, and we want to flip this around and make it be all about you and make sure that your experience is fulfilling. So with that, Lori, this is a great opportunity for some questions. Let's open it up to any questions that might be out there.
Actually, yeah, a great question by Shannon just came in. So at her organization, she has a number of volunteer positions, and she sends available positions through e-news or through her e-newsletter. Do you have a recommendation for how to not overwhelm volunteers if we send out all positions open and not available?
Wow, yeah, and I do recognize that some organizations have quite a lengthy list of different types of roles. So, one thought that comes to mind is if you have a website or if you have some sort of central portal where you could post all of that information, if it's not already out there, and then being able to just provide a link that says, if you're interested in seeing all available roles, or all the different ways that you could serve in this organization, then please click this link. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. I do recognize that some organizations just have a short list of current volunteer roles, whereas others have quite a lengthy list, and I can see how that could be overwhelming. So it's a good question, and I recommend that you can use some technology to be able to make that a bit more brief and then still give people the link to the resources.
Okay, and if we have time, maybe we'll do one more for now, but don't worry, everyone, we're going to get to more later. So this is from Sid Friedman. So if you send out all roles, how do you deal with current people in those roles so they don't feel like they're being pushed out?
Oh, wow, that's a really good question. And again, I do remind leaders that you really are responsible for creating the culture within your organization. And, a lot of that happens through proactive and meaningful discussions that you're having with your current volunteers, because it's not likely that those folks every one of them wants to sit in that role for perpetuity. Maybe some of them might, but we can't assume that. And as well, they may be interested in being able to shift around to some different roles. But ultimately, I really think it's about having open and honest conversations with people to say, this is not about replacing you. This is actually about adding to our entire battalion of volunteers. So, again, it comes just through open and honest conversations, because I could see where somebody might have that misperception if there was not that advanced conversation that helped them to understand that we're just trying to attract as many people as we can to serve in as many different ways as possible in this organization. And let me just add one more thought that will help address that. I've seen this work very effectively in a number of different organizations where if you have somebody in a role and they've been serving for quite some time, again, it's based upon the individual and their personality and also their unique wants and desires, but being able to share that role and have co-leaders perform in a specific capacity can be really effective. And again, it allows people to dial into their specific gifts and their talents and be able to really just focus on the things that feed their passion the most while sharing that load and that responsibility with somebody else who can complement them in that capacity. So an additional thought right there.
Great. There's some other great questions in here, but let's move on, and at the next break I'll ask them. So everyone just keep putting in your questions in chat and hopefully we can get to all of them.
Yeah, let's keep those coming. And thank you so much, Lori. I appreciate that. So as we look at the volunteer continuum, that next phase is the discovery phase. And here's an opportunity for us to be able to dig in just a bit more into the results of the survey that you had sent in advance. And I broke the responses that I read. I skimmed over the hundreds that we had collected, and I put them into 6 different buckets. So one, I called it an all call. And basically what that is, hey everybody, we need volunteers. And that is a common technique, and not one that I discourage within organizations. It's certainly important to let people know and to remind them that volunteers, were always in need of volunteers in an organization. As well, I saw the strategy of tell them something. In other words, we dropped into talk mode and we started talking to, or more likely talking at, that potential volunteer or that potential leader to tell them something about the organization or about the role or about our specific need. As well, I saw that a number of organizations just dropped into asking, or it even devolved into begging or pleading. Saw that listed a number of times. And also, I saw the incentive track being taken a number of times where organizations says we give them something. And of course, you know your volunteers best, and you know that that may be effective. We're going to talk a bit about appreciation and recognition and incentive and rewards at the end of our time together. So we'll touch on that just a bit more. But several organizations giving them something, and then also I saw several organizations holding an event. So what that event might be is it's an attraction event on the front end, which is always a cool idea, or it's some sort of appreciation event that's held after the fact. So those events seem to be driven as part of a way of attracting people to serve in an organization. And then finally, that 6th category, and the one that I deeply applaud any organization, if you are using any sort of personal interaction or touch in some way where you're able to just spend one-on-one time and have a thoughtful conversation with an individual to find out what's stirring in their heart, that is something good that you're doing, and I strongly encourage you to consider that to add to your repertoire. But let's acknowledge that that conversation may not come easy for everybody. So in the book, Engaging the Head, Heart, and Hands of a Volunteer, I dedicated 15 pages just to how you specifically would have that conversation. I broke it down into 6 specific steps, and it begins with both seeking and touching. So think of you in performing in your capacity, in your role, in your volunteer organization, and you're at an event or you're somewhere where you're around other people, and you're always head on a swivel, and you're looking for opportunities to be able to engage people and to be able to reach out and shake a hand and maybe initiate a conversation. And sometimes that can be challenging because we get so wrapped up in all of our own tasks and our duties that we overlook our responsibility to being able to seek, excuse me, and to be able to actively touch and begin those meaningful conversations with potential volunteers. And I always encourage that once those conversations begin, and I'm sure that many of us have encountered that moment where you get the slightest hint that somebody might be interested in getting a bit more involved, that they may be interested in stepping up into some sort of leadership capacity. And that's where I encourage you as a leader, you really need to tune in at that point. And at that specific point, it is so natural for us to just begin talking about the opportunities and the roles and the open spaces that we have on our board or whatever it might be. And instead, that's the point where I ask you to put on the brakes and think about flipping that conversation around and making that conversation be all about that individual. And how you do that is by using open-ended questions in what I call the discovery conversation. So here are a few examples of open-ended questions. In other words, I'll define that for you. Questions that cannot be answered with just a simple yes or no, but questions that require some explanation. And you get to, after you, the leader, you drop this question into the conversation, you get to just shut up. And you get to just listen and learn from that person as they share their story. So here's one. What brings you here? What attracted you to the organization? So you're really getting to the root of why that person is here to begin with. Another open-ended question that you could consider is, well, tell me about your interests or your hobbies. What do you like to do? Or you can flip it around and say, what do you not like to do? My father is a brilliant reminder to me. In fact, it's the reason why I included that question in the book as a recommendation, because I've tried these questions on him. My father, still at 78 years old, he loves to volunteer with his church and get involved in a lot of different ways. And he's not really good at answering the questions of the things that he likes to do. But boy, you flip that question around, he is really, really skilled at answering the things that he does not want to do. He is really crystal clear on that. So sometimes you can glean a lot of powerful information just by flipping that question around. You can ask somebody what they do professionally, or ask them to describe their development goals. So find out what they do, or maybe an area where they would like to grow. Now, I do offer that question with a caveat, because I love to share this story. I work closely with a homeless ministry, as Lori had mentioned. And Pastor Scott Ballou, who's the founder of that of Matthew's Hope, he shared a story with me one time of a person who presented to volunteer, and the first thing that they said is, please, oh please, do not make me work with children. And they were really clear about that. And then they followed it and said, because it's really important for me that these children go home alive today. And I chuckled. And then Pastor Scott, when he finished the story, he says, and the reason why she shared that with me when she wanted to volunteer is because she is a teacher. So in other words, professionally, she spends time with children all day long, and she had no desire in her service life to be able to work with children, but she wanted to do something else. So ask the question about professional life and your development goals, but don't automatically assume that a volunteer wants to do what they do in their career world the same in their volunteer life. And then maybe talk about some special skills or talents or strengths that they could apply to benefit others. So again, just some examples of open-ended questions that could be used to inspire a meaningful conversation where you, the leader, you get to just be quiet and you listen as somebody else shares what's going on that may compel them to want to get more deeply involved. And then as you're doing that, you listen, you learn, you soak it all in, but still another moment for you to just say, hold on a second, let's not be so hasty at trying to plug somebody into a role immediately. I find that leaders often will do that. They'll say, great, we did something really, really good today because we got this person plugged into a job that is in some way aligned to their skills. But instead, I say, let's be patient and let's practice a little discernment and follow up with that person, connect them with some other people, maybe establish a time where we're going to have our next conversation or a follow-up phone call or an email or whatever it might be. And I say slow and steady wins the race when it comes to those next steps. So here I present this as the guide for engaging volunteers, and I offer Lori, again, a great opportunity for us to stop and answer some more questions.
Sure. Yeah, I actually, so while you were speaking there, I think you kind of answered it, but people are asking, how do you how do you do all this stuff in practical ways? So the discovery conversation seems like a practical way to kind of tune in and seek out people's needs. And transition, so Ro asks, is how do you transition the conversation to their needs? So is that the main way you recommend doing it, by having these discovery conversations before people volunteer, sign up? Or how do you kind of practically implement some of this stuff?
Yeah, I've had organizations who have said, you know what, all of this sounds wonderful, and in fact, what we're going to do is we're going to build a survey that collects all of this information. And we try to somehow institutionalize what is otherwise just designed to be a simple yet meaningful conversation. And we certainly can use technology to be able to help gather and collate all of this information, to bring it together, but ultimately it's whatever we choose to do with that information that really makes the difference. And I continue to remind leaders, no matter the size of your organization, and no matter how overwhelming it might feel at the beginning, there really is no replacement for one-on-one engagement. Engagement really happens one person at a time, and it is through these personal touches right here that we really help people to find their alignment. So if that feels overwhelming to you, don't think about everybody you have to talk to. Just think about the next person that you need to talk to and be able to start with that one conversation. And I suggest that if you're a leader and you're really passionate about what you do in your organization, that you're going to find, whether it's right away or whether it's over time, that those conversations, they not only flow, but you gain so many lovely insights about people that help you help them. And ultimately, as you're doing that, you gain those long-term results for your organization.
Sorry. Okay, so we'll follow up with that in a bit, but some people are asking, how do you do that when it's just you're the only leader, or how do you take all that information and kind of put into a system like Wild Apricot and maintain and collect that information about your volunteers? But I kind of wanted to get to this question by Cole, because it's right on the slide here. What do you mean when you say flip on point number 4?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you're asking, because I'll emphasize that again. The flip part is flipping the conversation around, and it's a reminder to you as the leader to not go down the path of talking about the organization, because that is typically what happens in the course of a conversation that flows much like the one that I just described. Well, as soon as we get a whiff that somebody might want to get more involved, we're like, okay, great, let me tell you about the jobs that we have. Or let me tell you about the open board positions, or let me tell you about the different ways that you can get involved. And again, we drop into tell mode, and the flip part is a reminder to flip that conversation around, and you go into asking mode, where you're using those open-ended questions to find out what it is that is burning in the heart of that person that may compel them to be able to offer their gifts and their time and their talent in a meaningful way that's going to serve the organization. So that's what flip means. It's just a reminder to you, the leader, to flip that conversation around.
Okay, and maybe one last thought and comment here before we move on from Alina. So she said that several times she's tried to do that slow and steady, personal touch, scheduling a meeting with a volunteer, orient them, and then she's found that they've lost interest. On the other hand, where she meets them and puts them to work right away, they thrive. So what do you suggest with that, with kind of the pacing of everything?
Well, I do recognize that with guidance, one size will never fit all. And if she is finding that that's the approach that seems to be working well at connecting people in her organization, then I would never discourage somebody from taking that path. The reason why I talk about next steps and why I talk about that generally discernment and taking a pause is we often, as leaders, we do, and in the book I call this process mapping, where what we'll do is as soon as we hear, okay, this person likes this, we'll key in on one particular aspect of the information that they shared, and we'll immediately plug them into a role that in some way tangentially is connected to their skill set or their interests or whatever it might be. And then we brush our hands together in self-satisfaction, thinking that we did something really, really good that day, and we walk away from the situation and we again drop it into what I call set it and forget it mode. And that's why I encourage us to, just continue to linger on that and to make sure that that person really is interested and that we're really getting them connected into a role that's going to give them meaning. Because I have found that that haste sometimes ends up working against the organization and its longer-term objectives. So again, whatever works best for your organization, but just make sure that you're being cautious about not being too hasty at just mapping somebody into a role, getting them plugged in, and then walking away thinking that everything else is going to work itself out.
Right, great point. Okay, so again, lots of great questions still streaming in, but I'd say let's move on and then we'll take a break again in a little bit.
Okay, and Lori, I don't see my time in front of me, so give me a quick time check if you could, please.
Is almost 3:40, so you've got about 15 minutes.
Perfect. We're right on time then. Thank you so much. All right, so pressing into the next phase of the volunteer continuum, we're going to look at the sustainment phase, and I want to offer two specific recommendations in our final moments together that will help you to stretch that sustainment phase and make it last as long as you possibly can. And again, I was hearing some healthy skepticism in these questions, and I get it. Believe me, I get it. There is a reason why a lot of these practices just don't happen in organizations. Time is always the challenge, and I absolutely understand it. I have worn this hat many, many times myself. It was really a lot of those reasons that compelled me to put all of these words into the form of a book and to offer this kind of guidance, because if we continue to fall into that where we say we just don't have enough time to do this, we never get off that treadmill. But as it is with leadership, the more proactive steps that you can take to be able to build your arsenal of volunteers and to get people more deeply engaged and serving in your cause in a meaningful way, then ultimately that is what is going to lead you to the place that you want to go. And one of those practices I call coaching, which is really otherliness in action from a leadership perspective. So many of you might be familiar with this practice on the corporate side in your work life. Coaching is conducting regularly scheduled one-on-one discussions between the leader and the volunteer, and that discussion's focused on performance and development. In other words, how are you doing in your role, and in what ways would you like to grow in your service here? That's what I mean by performance and development. And again, some of you may have these conversations in your professional life, or maybe you may be sharing scheduled conversations similar to this in your volunteer space, where you're in the leadership role, or possibly somebody else may be conducting these conversations with you. And if you are, I would love for you to think about what the benefits are that you are gaining from being a part of that coaching relationship and adding it in the chat box. But while we do that, I just want to build out this concept a bit more. So coaching, it's the idea of not just catching people in the act of doing something great and letting them know, even though that's important. I call that feedback. But having scheduled one-on-one discussions, whether they happen once a month, once a quarter, maybe twice a year, whatever the right frequency is for you, the leader, to be able to touch base with the other volunteers who serve in your organization, those scheduled conversations, once they're on your calendar and they're on the other person's calendar, it really adds a level of gravity to the conversation. It lets them know that this is really important time that the two of you are going to spend, and it's really all about them. So it's essentially a discovery conversation that happens over and over and over again, where you, the leader, get to just ask more open-ended questions to help understand, why does this person continue to serve? What is it that keeps you coming back? What are the things that you're doing that really jazz you about your role? What are the things that you don't dig about the way that you're serving as a volunteer here right now? Imagine the value that you could gain from having these meaningful conversations. So, Lori, I'm going to toss it back to you. that you say that actually at Apricot that you're doing that. So I can ask you from a personal perspective, but I also would love to hear the other voices in the chat box. What are the benefits that they're gaining from being a part of a coaching relationship?
Okay, so we'll wait to hear from everyone on what the benefits are from that. And while those are coming in, a lot of questions came in here while you're talking, Barry, that how can we do this with, say 1,000 volunteers, and how do you deal with these busy schedules that volunteers already have? They just don't have the time for this kind of one-on-one. And I know at Wild Apricot, we do these one-on-ones with our staff and managers. And unless we schedule it, they just don't happen. So it's a commitment. It is a commitment. It takes time, but we find the benefits tremendous. So I don't know how you deal with busy schedules other than just schedule it and make it a priority, right?
Well, and Laura, you're absolutely right. And first of all, if any of your organizations have thousands of volunteers, good for you. I think that that's wonderful that any organization could attract thousands of volunteers. So in the book, I specifically use a word attached to a category of volunteers where you may consider engaging in this coaching conversation. I talk about your dedicated volunteers, the ones who are truly your full-timers, who are there on a regular basis, who have been around for a while, and you recognize the value of having an ongoing dialogue with them. So if you've got a lot of one-timers or folks who just come around every now and again, maybe investing in this time with them may not deliver you a lot of value, and I totally get that. And I can see how this could be overwhelming. But think about those people where you could say, you know what, I haven't sat down and actually talked with that person for a while, and recognize that, if I could just dedicate 15 minutes to sitting down with this person. Again, we'll schedule it. I'll make sure that I'm available, that I can give them my full attention. We'll make sure that they're also going to be here and present, or possibly on the phone. It's also acceptable to have a phone conversation, to just be able to chat and catch up with somebody. But the purpose behind it is that you're focused on that individual, and you're talking solely about how they're doing in their role and what more you can do to support them as they grow in the role. Those are the only two focus areas for that conversation. So, Lori, all that said, what else did we hear in the chat box?
Right. So just adding on what you're saying there, so the comments we're hearing, so Jessica says, by doing these one-on-ones, their volunteers feel like their input's actually being valued because their feedback is being directly talked to, so that's helping engage.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And then Tara here, it's about making the volunteer know that they're actually important to the organization. And also, these one-on-ones are an opportunity to find out if there are any issues, or even better, if they have ideas that they want to implement themselves. So I don't think those would come out without those one-on-ones. So that's a great point, Tara.
Yeah, lots of great points that you're hearing right there. And I talk about the layered impact of a coaching relationship because I completely agree with the person who made the point that not only do you get incredible value from the conversation itself, but the feeling, the emotion that goes along with the fact that you, the leader, are investing time, that you set aside your time. Imagine how important it makes that person feel. And again, you're enhancing their emotional connection to your organization just by virtue of sharing your time and your attention. So lots of really powerful things that you as leaders can do. And as you're doing these things, especially if you're part of a board or part of a leadership group within an organization, be they staff members or more likely volunteers, sitting down, having those conversations on a regular basis, you decide the frequency. There is incredible value to doing that. And as Lori said, those insights that you gain, you're not going to likely get them any other time except for just sitting down and having those conversations. So coaching is one recommendation that I have for sustaining the volunteer engagement in the continuum. The other one that I talk about is acknowledging desired performance. And I offer 4 specific terms. I had alluded to them in the past, and I want to build upon them right now because I strongly believe that whether it's in your work world and certainly in the volunteer space, that most people get these 4 distinct concepts a little bit confused, a little bit mashed up together as if they are all one. And I wanted to spend a few moments to help emphasize that they are, in fact, four distinct different efforts on your part. And the first one is appreciation. So you'll look for the definition right there, and it's just a general show of gratitude for people who are there, for the qualities that they demonstrate, and their overall contribution that they make. And that is, it often comes across as, everybody, I just want to thank you so much for all of the wonderful things that you have done today, and as a result of that, we're going to have cupcakes at the end of our day today, or something like that. So that is what I call general appreciation, and how that works in contrast to something that I call recognition is that recognition is a specific expression that provides acknowledgement for having met or exceeded performance expectations. And recognition, this is the most important part, it has intrinsic emotional value to the person receiving it. Usually recognition is offered verbally. So recognition is something that you would say to somebody else to specifically let them know exactly what you observed them do or what you heard them say and the impact that it made. In fact, I offer a feedback model in the book that I've been sharing in corporate setting for many, many years now, and it's really been received to wide embrace. And it's just a simple three-component model that reminds you that anytime that you offer feedback, especially feedback for recognition, that you include some sort of superlative word, like a wow word, and that you describe the behavior, and then you also describe the impact of that behavior. So I call it the RBI right there. So recognition, behavior, and impact. If you're a baseball fan, that's pretty easy to remember. RBI, recognition, behavior, and impact. If you include those three as you say something to somebody and you call attention to something specific that they did, you're really going to get their attention. You're going to let them know how much you value their service. In contrast to that, we have rewards, which are tangible items that are provided in acknowledgement for somebody who meets or exceeds expectations. And then reward, in contrast to a recognition, has extrinsic or monetary value. So I often hear recognition and reward lumped together, and those are two very different efforts. And I emphasize that only because one of them has emotional value and the other one has extrinsic or monetary value, and one of them can stand alone, whereas the other one always requires the other one to go along with it in order for it to be meaningful and effective. So recognition, your verbal words, what you share with somebody, that can stand on its own and still deliver value back to the organization and to the individual. However, if you give somebody a reward, but you don't follow it with any words that help them to attach that reward to their specific performance, you've lost its value. You've really missed an opportunity in that point. So I offer that, and then finally the incentive, you'll see the definition for that, and how it's similar to reward in some ways, except for with an incentive, you knew the deal going in. You knew that if you did X, you would receive Y. And that's the difference between incentive and reward. A reward comes as a nice surprise, whereas an incentive, you're expecting it because you knew what the deal was going into the relationship. And I offer this to say that it really comes back to recognition. Of these four, they can all have value in specific circumstances, and you get to choose as a leader which one will be most effective in your organization. But the one that has the lowest investment and the highest return is recognition. When you take the time to offer your words to let somebody know specifically what they did and the impact of what they did that it had, that ultimately you're going to really help that person to connect their service to something that is intrinsically meaningful to them. Basically, you're going to touch their heart. And I continue to remind it, and I hear the healthy skeptics out there. I was once one myself until I finally got to this point where I realized that in order for real engagement to happen, we need to bring it down to those personal relationships and acknowledge that it happens one person at a time. So as much as time will allow, Lori, I'd love to entertain some more questions.
Okay, so lots of great questions here, and just so you know, we're at 10 minutes left, so we're at the end. Okay, great. From Jody, just on that last section you spoke about, so how do you look for ways within your organization to allow for the organization to appreciate the volunteers? So what are some kind of practical ways of doing that?
Say that again, Lori, to make sure I understand the question.
So I guess, what are the ways that you can appreciate or recognize the volunteers' impact? So how does the organization actually show that to them? Like, what are some tangible ways to do that? I hope that's right, Jody.
Yeah, and again, I do see this frequently, that we feel like we must give something to somebody, that it needs to be something tangible that we give. And if you allow me to just share an anecdote, I know this anecdote will not paint me in the most positive light, but it's honest, and I'm being open and candid to share this story with you for a very specific reason, because this happened to me a few months ago. I spoke in front of a civic organization, went to a breakfast meeting, and they made me work really, really hard that day. I love to create interactive learning environments. I love to throw lots of questions and get lots of voices involved in the learning conversation. And I just couldn't get people to bite that day. They really were making me sweat. And then finally, I did get some folks that jumped into the conversation near the end of our time together. But overall, it was not one of my better performances in getting folks to engage. But at the end of this session, what this group did is they brought me up front and they presented me with a plaque. And this plaque had a picture of a sundown over a lake, because this was a particular lakeside community where I was sharing some thoughts. And then it was also a logo of their organization. And candidly, I really didn't care about that plaque very much. It didn't mean anything to me because the tangible component had nothing to do with why I was there and offering my services to the organization. What I really wanted to do was to just inspire them to think about the way that they engage their volunteers in their organization a little bit differently, and at the very least, if they just would have actively jumped into the learning conversation and played along, and we would have had some really meaningful chat that morning, that would have meant so much more to me than what that plaque did. So I share that just as an example, that chances are those who receive the tchotchkes and the items that you give, they're likely going to smile, and chances are they're going to tell you that they appreciate receiving that, but only a percentage of them, that plaque or that certificate or whatever it might be, that will have meaningful intrinsic value to them. Because the reality is, when it comes to recognition, the recognition is as unique to the individuals as our intrinsic motivators are. So what matters to one person will not matter to another person, but yet we always try to find ways that we can acknowledge performance for everybody in the exact same way. And the best thing I recommend is get to know somebody, find out what they would desire for their recognition, and then do your best to be able to recognize them in that meaningful way. That's really going to work for them.
So I guess it always comes down to the personal touch, right? and Barb was saying, oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not the easiest answer. You're right. It's not always the most efficient way, but I promise you it is the most effective way to be able to engage people.
Right, and Barb here mentioned, how can we reward people amply without any budget or anything, and it sounds like, you actually don't. You could just do this for free, so that's great. I have a good question from Claire that I want to address, because a lot of our volunteers, so there's volunteers to do duties and all the kinds of things at the organization, but a lot of our volunteers are board members. So do you apply these same strategies for board members, or is there a little bit of a difference in how you approach that?
It all depends. Here's one thing that I've discovered in my work with nonprofit organizations is that nearly every single board that exists functions in a slightly different way. So here is an additional layer that I recommend for board members is there needs to be not just one, but I suggest a series of thoughtful conversations that occurs prior to anybody joining or thinking that they may be ready to join a board to serve, say, as a board of directors or whatever it might be. Because some boards are highly active and they have a high expectation that the people who are on the board are working board members. Whereas other boards function purely as advisory boards, and then other boards will function really just as people who sit in the role but aren't expected to do much. Their title and their name holds enough cachet that they're there just for that purpose. And I found that there is so much board turmoil that exists in organizations because they don't have enough meaningful conversations to be able to really get clear between the individual and the organization in what capacity every single person is going to fill when they're serving on that board. So I think that that's an additional layer that really needs to be considered anytime that you're looking at board membership or board engagement, is let's get really clear with each other about what exactly is expected of the performance of the board member.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. And I see we're getting close to time, so I'm going to try to distill a lot of these questions into two main things. So I'm hearing from a lot of people here, Barry, that they've got volunteers all over the world sometimes, or there's too many. So how can we maybe scale up a little bit of what you're saying? And then maybe you could also end off on what's one thing that they could immediately implement to improve their volunteer recruitment strategy? Because a lot of this is kind of building up over time. Is there something that they can do quickly?
Yep. Yeah, so the scaling up piece, I actually offer something in the book called the Time and Talent Matrix, and it's a pretty simple model that says how much time potentially is this person going to invest. In other words, are they a one-timer, or are they going to be here for the long haul? And the talent piece is also recognizing that, is this person, do we really not need that? Do we need somebody who can fog a mirror, basically, somebody who has no special talent at all, or do we need somebody who is highly skilled in a specific area? And then as you look at those two axes, what they do is they create a grid that has 4 different quarters or quadrants. And in the most simple of quadrants, and I think that this applies for those who deal with a large group of volunteers, is whenever possible, offer your volunteers choice. That is the single recommendation that I offer to any of you that are in a leadership role that are dealing with mass quantities of volunteers, is the more that you give people opportunities to choose how they're going to perform and what they're going to do, when, where, whatever it might be, that is ultimately the key that's going to lead to their own fulfillment. The less that you are directive in saying, this is exactly what you're going to do, this is where you're going to do it, this is when you're going to do it, this is how you're going to do it, but instead just back off and let them define their own roles as much as you can within your structure, that really fulfills a basic human need that we all have, which is that self-fulfillment. To be able to be self-directed and to be able to just say, hey, I have some free will, I'd like to make some choices in my own outcomes here.
Sorry, thanks. Great. That was a great way to end it. And maybe one last tip for an immediate, what's one quick immediate thing everyone could implement tomorrow that you think would improve something?
If you encounter a volunteer and it dawns on you that you have not had a conversation with them in some time, take the time to just sit and chat with them and begin, because again, that engagement, it happens one person at a time, and if you drop a couple open-ended questions and just stop and listen and learn, chances are you're going to pick up a couple gold nuggets.
Awesome. I love it. And for those who maybe have like a huge group of that, maybe a survey, just a quick survey, asking them to just vent and let it all out. So thank you, Barry. That was great. There's a lot of questions here, so maybe, Barry, you can look at some of them afterwards. Thank you, everyone, for using your chat box, and for anyone who is using Twitter. I'm just going to make a few very quick announcements before you head off. So again, we will be sending a recording of this webinar tomorrow, and so you'll get everything. And I want to let you know 2 weeks from now, we're having another webinar on how to lead member engagement from the inside out. So again, it's very much what we talked about again today, in how do you actually understand your members better. So it's about membership as well as volunteering. That's a couple weeks from now. And then a special announcement, we actually have a big summit coming up in April, and we're really excited about this because it's going to be all about kind of digital marketing practices for associations and nonprofits. And we brought in some of these digital marketing experts to show you how to set up an online funnel, how you can create Facebook ads, Google ads, and use Google Grants. We have Amy Sample Ward from the Nonprofit Technology Network talking about social media. Robbie Kelman Baxter, who's going to look at your membership model. Sarah Sladek, how you can engage Gen Y. This is all coming up April 4th to April 8th. That's 5 webinars, or actually 6 webinars over 5 days, and totally free. So we're going to send you an email about that on Monday, but you guys are the first to know about it. This is the first time we've said anything about it publicly. So thanks for joining us. I hope you do attend that. And for anyone who's new to Wild Apricot, I just want to let you know about our demos. If you're interested in seeing how our software works, someone did ask how to use, how to set up this information about your volunteers in a system. You can do that in Wild Apricot. So that's every Wednesday, 2 to 3. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you again, Barry. It's great.
Oh, my pleasure.
Webinar.
My pleasure.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.